welcome you all to the David Iornem Leadership Foundation, and it's the second annual lecture. We have our speakers, guest speakers available. Special guest of honor is here. My co-host, Nashaka, has also joined. So I'll talk you through what to expect. First and foremost, like I said, I would mute everyone and we'll have a Q&A session after the presentations. So if you have any questions, I would encourage you to make a note of the questions and we'll address them during the Q&A session. If you wish to make a comment or ask a question, you can do this by using the raise hand icon, or you can put the question in the chat box. Then I will unmute you and you can then ask or make your contribution. You are also free to post your comments or questions in the chat box, and at the end of the presentations, we will review the chats during the Q&A session. Electronic copy of the presentation will be made available, or the full paper will be made available upon request. So this is how the agenda is going to be, and I think we are on time. The first paper, which is on COVID-19 and the future of higher education in Nigeria, We Swim Together or Drown Together, will be presented by Professor Gabriel Moti. And the second paper, How US Universities are Adapting in Response to COVID-19 and what Nigerian tertiary education can learn from them, will be presented by Professor Stevina Evulocha-Ugba. And we're going to receive comments and contribution from our special guest of honor, Professor David Iornem. And at the end, we'll have a Q&A session where we'll take questions, contributions from others, and we'll close the event. So I'd like to first and foremost introduce our first speaker in the person of Professor Gabriel Moti. Just a little bit about Professor Moti. He is a professor of public administration in the University of Abuja, and he specializes in public sector management and governance. He was a former deputy dean of the Faculty of Management Sciences and has held several administrative positions in the university, including membership of the University Senate representing Faculty of Management Sciences. He has published over 30 articles in peer-reviewed local and international academic journals. Professor Moti is a notable public policy analyst in Nigeria, and his research interests include public sector management and governance, public policy analysis, and development administration. Today, he will be talking to us about some of the challenges Nigerian universities are facing in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic and what lessons we can get. And our second speaker, Professor Stevina Evulocha-Ugba. She is a professor of marketing and entrepreneurship. She retired in August 2019 from the California State University, East Bay's College of Business and Economics after 29 years on the faculty. Her areas of expertise include business communication, social marketing, crisis communication, corporate social responsibility, and employment communication. Dr. Evulocha was the first to publish scholarly research on Nigeria's Nollywood industry, and among the first to recognize the impact of interactive multimedia on student learning styles. Dr. Evulocha was a guest lecturer at the Dubai Leadership Summit organized by the Commonwealth University, and she has served as a mentor for the Tony Elumelu Foundation Entrepreneurship Program, and she recently completed a 2-year term as president of the Spouses of African Ambassadors in Moscow. I welcome Professor Stevina Ugba, who will be leading discussions on what the US are doing and how Nigerian universities can model what the US is doing. At this juncture, I would like to invite my colleague, the David Iornem Leadership Foundation coordinator, Mr. Nasha Kia, to introduce our special guest of honor today.
Well, there can be no honor greater than presenting the special guest of honor on this occasion to our audience. More so that he's 71. It's not so much about the duration, but it's so much about his donation. And Professor David Iornem has donated so much to society. He's a management consultant, a university teacher, and author of international standing. His works have appeared in Management in Nigeria. It's an authoritative journal of the Nigerian Institute of Management, Chartered. He has held appointive and elective public offices, including being Senator of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Professor David Iornem is an accredited management trainer. He has authored over 30 books. He is the founder of the London Graduate School, United Kingdom, the Commonwealth University, and is a co-founder of École Supérieure University in Cotonou, Benin Republic. He is a professor of management science with the University of Costa Rica. He has taught management, marketing, human resources management, and other management courses at several universities, including the Ahmadu Bello University here in Nigeria, Kaduna Polytechnic, also in Nigeria, Union University Institute of the United States of America. Professor Iornem has won several accolades, including the American National Award 2016, which was actually presented to him by the President of the United States of America. I think there's much to be said about Professor David Iornem, but this is just an abridged series. We have not even talked about his Dubai Leadership Summit, what has brought so many people across the globe together. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, our special, guest speakers, please join me in welcoming Professor David Iornem. Thank you very much.
And so once again, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, guest speakers, I want to say we have officially opened the session, and I'll be handing over to Professor Moti, who will be leading discussions, and we'll have questions for him at the end of the entire presentation. So Professor Moti, over to you. I will stop sharing at this juncture so you can share your presentation. Thank you.
So what we are going to do is to take us through the experience in Nigeria, what has happened during the COVID-19, and the challenges that we face in the country. We have 30 minutes, so hoping that in the next 30 minutes, I should be able to round up and give my next colleague to continue with the second paper. Now, can we move on? Yes. So we realize that the COVID-19 pandemic, even though it's a head concern, we recognize that it has caused a lot of challenges. And these challenges make us recognize that it is an independent international worldwide country governance assessor. In other words, a lot of institutions in the world have been exposed, their strength or lack of it, and some countries have found out that their systems have been very weak. Others have found out that their systems are not resilient enough to cope with what we are going through. And some have found out that their systems are completely dysfunctional as they confront this COVID-19. And this has to do not just with health or education or economics and so on and so forth. Every aspect of our life have been affected. And it looks like we are going to live with this consequence way into the near future. And this is what we are trying to look at. Now let's take a look at the international scene, just an overview. The next. So on the international scene, we realize that the UNESCO has given us some statistics that by April 2020, higher institutions in the world were impacted seriously by COVID-19 because they were all shut down.
With that, we had a situation where you have all these numbers affected all over the world. And we have a situation where the International Association of Universities had to do a global survey to find out what was going on. And this global survey was available between March and April 2020. And some of the experiences that were shared globally were that there were limitations in terms of countries that were prepared to move from face-to-face learning to the online learning that became what was more or less the normal at this particular point in time. So we had that situation. The second experience that was shared was that what we had was that majority of the students were also not able to learn because there were inadequate facilities in some of the schools. In other words, infrastructure and accessibility was a problem. Again, one of the problems noted internationally was also that we had issues of accessibility, which I have mentioned. The second issue was the issue of distance learning competencies and pedagogies, because you cannot just go online if you do not put you do not train your students, you do not train your staff, and you do not prepare your pedagogies in such a manner that you can shift it to online learning. The third problem that was noted internationally was that in particular field of studies had problems. For instance, you could not say that clinical medicine, veterinary medicine, engineering, and some other discipline that required using laboratories and so on and so forth were some of the examples that the study teased out, saying that they had to completely be replaced because they were not prepared. That was at the international level. At the African level, the Association of African Universities also observed that whereas other educational institutions were closed in Africa, some few were going on. And they also had a sort of report. The African Association of Universities, the E-Learning Africa, and Willy Education Services, they partnered together with this African Universities Association and tried to find out what was going on and how they could help the African universities to move onto the online learning and keep them going. And what they found out that in their preparedness survey, which was carried out early this year, around from February, March, they discovered that a lot of the universities were expected to teach and supervise even while the lockdown was on. But 25 out of the 78 universities that are members of this association were not expected to teach completely or fully, but only partially. 41 of them were expected to partially teach, where 16 were not expected to teach. And what was the problem discovered? The challenges were that there was limited preparedness for online courses. The second was that there was digital divide challenge affecting students who were living in unconnected areas. And the other one was infrastructural challenge, because there was lack of e-learning platform in a lot of these universities. Even where they existed, some of the challenges observed was that you were dealing with large number of students online, and it was not easy to handle so many students online. And so the African Association of Universities now concluded that although there was certain level of learning online that was going on, it was not comparable to what was going on in the more developed countries, which we are going to hear soon from the second speaker. And therefore, they urge African countries to try and step up and scale up ICT technology so that many more universities and learners will be able to come online and be in touch with the curriculum so that we do not miss up completely. And so one of the biggest recommendations they did was they were able to tell African countries, encourage them. They also recommended some short-term measures that could be adopted. Now, the Nigerian experience. Before we take the Nigerian experience, let me just give you a background. We have a lot of universities in Nigeria. It is difficult sometimes to give exactly the total number of universities you have in Nigeria because they keep on changing. Many universities are being incorporated, especially private universities. But as of now, we have 174 universities in Nigeria, 79 private universities, 52 state universities, and 43 federal universities, about 104 polytechnics, 152 colleges of education, 22 owned by the federal government, 48 by state, and 82 by private. So you can see that we have a lot of private universities in Nigeria this moment. And that is, of course, a very, very big number that we are dealing with. So, given that background, we also realize and understand that what we are going to be facing in Nigeria is an issue where you have a lot of institutions that are not ready to go online completely. Why? One of the problems is the issue of infrastructure. A lot of these universities do not have required infrastructure to be able to go online. So that is one of the biggest issues we have. And if my screen was on, you would have seen the examples I've given of poor infrastructure in most of these universities. And studies have shown that whereas there are infrastructure here and there, the bottom line is that we have inadequate infrastructure, both in terms of classrooms, in terms of hostels, in terms of even offices, and ICT facilities for that. The second background I want to give is the issue of University Global Ranking. The University Global Ranking, which has just come out this year, shows that we have about 10 prominent top ranking Nigerian universities. And I try to compare them with what is happening in the world. So the most prominent university we have today, thank you very much for getting my screen on. The first university is the University of Ibadan we have, but if you look at the world ranking, the University of Ibadan is ranked 1,233 in the world, but in Nigeria, it is the best. Then UNN second, Covenant University of Ota third, Obafemi Awolowo fourth, Unilag fifth, ABU sixth, Unilorin, Federal University of Technology Akure, Adekunle Ajase University, and University of Port Harcourt, which was my alma mater. Now, these are the 10 top university ranking in Nigeria today, but you can see their position in world ranking. Now, that gives you an idea of the background of higher institutions that we're dealing with in Nigeria. And you know that some of the indicators that are used, facilities, student to faculty ratio, citation, global survey that uses all this, Nigeria is very lacking in most of this. And therefore, you can see a background of what we are coming to. The next slide. You have gone too fast. You have gone too far. Go back again, if you can. Yes. The other issue is the issue of budget and funding. I've given a breakdown of the budget of Nigerian universities. This excludes the private university because they don't benefit from Nigerian educational budget. But from 2010 to 2020, where we are now, you can see that the budget of Nigeria presented in trillion from 2010 was about 5 trillion, 2020, 10 trillion. But the budget for education this year is 691 billion. And that is just 6.7% of the budget of Nigeria. Now, the UNESCO guideline says it should be about 26%. So if you look at all that has happened right from 2010 to now, there is no year that Nigeria has reached even 10% allocation to the educational sector. And when we are saying the educational sector, it involves all, not just universities, even the secondary schools, the unitary schools that are owned by the federal government, they benefit from this. So you can see that there is also poor funding of Nigerian universities. Next. So what do we have today? What we find out this time is that by February 28th, that is when Nigeria had the first case of COVID-19 in the country. And by 19th March, the Federal Ministry of Education announced that Nigerian schools should be temporarily shut down, and that was effective March 23. But something we must understand in respect to this background is that even before schools were shut down in Nigeria, including universities, the ASU, or the Association Academic Staff Association of Universities, had already declared an indefinite, total, and comprehensive strike action in the country. So federal universities were already shut down in Nigeria even before COVID brought about the shutdown. And we are told that 40 million learners were out of school and out of learning at that time. Next. So I want to just lay a little bit emphasis on the ASU strike because it's going to be a factor in some of the things we are going to talk about. ASU called on a strike because they wanted the federal government to implement some of the memorandum of understanding they had entered with the government since 2009, 2013, 2017, which the government, after agreeing, has never implemented. And in addition to that, the federal government had already made up their mind to force on the university the integrated payroll and personnel information system, which is the IPPIS on the university system, and ASU wrongly objected to it, saying that it does not suit academic environment. So what we must take here is that even before COVID-19 in Nigeria forced schools and higher learning institutions to close down, the federal universities in Nigeria were already shut down. So, next. So, what do we do? The issue that Nigeria had to cope with because of this disruption was also to provide opportunities for learners to continue to learn. outside the face-to-face learning. But the Digital Report 2020 Global Overview showed us that if we take a look at what is happening in the country, in Nigeria today, we will discover that 60% Nigerians are not connected to the internet. 169.2 million are connected, which is just about 83%. They only have access to mobile telephone. They are not necessarily connected to the internet, but they have a mobile telephone which can be used for some form of learning or so on and so forth. Out of these 169 million, 50%, around 84 million, are people that reside in urban areas. So you see that the access to even telephony is skewed towards high socioeconomic household and urban household. So even if you want to go online, the problem is that a lot of the students and learners that are already in the rural areas where you do not have this connectivity will find it very difficult to follow. Next. So when you look at all this, what happens? When the COVID-19 struck, what we found out was that one, Nigeria attempted to see if they could go online. Well, for the universities, for the public universities, it was more or less impossible to do that because, like I said, they were already on strike. The Federal Ministry of Education, through the minister, Mr. Adamu, gave a directive, and even the schools that were boasting that they had these facilities, they suddenly discovered that they didn't have enough of these facilities. Well, it is noted that some of the private universities had some of these facilities, and indeed, they were going on with some elementary teaching online. However, when we're talking about the challenges that we have to deal with, we also have to differentiate between asynchronous e-learning and synchronous e-learning facilitated by social media like the email, discussion boards, and chatting and so on and so forth. This has always been going on in the universities. It's a flexible e-learning platform that has been going on, but it is not interactive as such. And so there is all that frustration when you will send a message, when it will arrive, you will reply back, and so on and so forth. It's been going on. A lot of the universities have been going on. But that is not the type of e-learning platform we're talking about. The e-learning type of platform we're talking about is the synchronous e-learning. This is where you can have a frustration of having to wait and get your answers. You can ask your questions and get the answers in real time. And this is the type of platform that we're talking about. And this is the type of platform of the e-learning that Nigeria needs to develop in the higher institutions as we go on. And that is what has been lacking. And what is making it lacking? One, I have mentioned it, the national, the African level system is lacking in many, many public universities, even private universities in Nigeria. Number two, that the students and even staff are not trained and ready to use this platform. Even if you mount them today, you would need to train the student, you would need to train the staff. Challenge is that a lot of staff and students don't have private computers that can help them go online to engage in these online studies. And that is very true. And then the problem of power supply, which is very erratic. And then the digital divide. We also have that in Nigeria, where others live in the urban areas. the connectivity could be good, the internet systems are there. In the villages, you don't have that. And even if the internet is available, the cost of buying data, who buys it? Is it the universities or the student that will provide this data for themselves? Very expensive, and these are all some of the challenges that we find today. So what is the way forward? People have argued, and I'm also arguing that the best time that this nation can do something is to use the ongoing crisis now, especially again that the schools are shut down, the higher institutions are shut down, to upgrade and provide the infrastructure. But when you have to do this, these do not come easy. So the issue of funding must be treated. And that is what has been causing the frustration between the federal government and ASU as a union for a very long time now. That has to be taken care of. The second one, if we do not use this opportunity and things come back to normal or near normal and we open, we have not learned anything. The third one is that this is an opportunity for government and ASU to also resolve the issue of the strike that is on. Because from what I see and from what I'm hearing, if this is not done, and although the federal government has already issued a circular to universities to do some preliminary studies of their level of preparedness, hoping that the universities may open. If this is not resolved, and with what has happened, the federal government withholding salaries of ASU members, universities may not open in the near 1999-20 session and even jeopardize the 2021 session. And so what are we here today? As it was announced, the person we're here to honor today and give this lecture is Professor Iornem. And we want to see what he has done in terms of distance learning and e-learning. Next. What we find out is that the person we are honoring today has been a great advocate and promoter of distance learning as well as e-learning in Nigeria and globally. He has been a champion of executive education of managers and leaders through short courses and executive training. And we have found out that one of them was mentioned before in the introduction, the famous Dubai Leadership Summit, the London Top Executive Management Seminar. This has been holding for a long time and has trained over 18,000 top executives from 70 countries all over the world, and we are still going on. We also found out that he has also been able to set up a university in Cotonou that is helping people learn. And one of the most interesting issues he has done in terms of his foresight is to bring on e-learning for academics and industry training professionals. That is what he incorporated in the Dubai Leadership Summit. And a lot of professors were coming for this, university managers were coming for this. That shows you that he had foresight that universities and higher institutions in Nigeria need to learn and train this. But we're also saying that he didn't just do this on his own. This we are taught in collaboration with UNESCO e-learning series, and a certification was also issued by UNESCO. And because at first, a lot of people did not know the foresight that he had, people started accusing him, how can you get people online to earn a degree? And you can see that I've shown you a picture where he's in the midst of operatives of the ICPC who were questioning him in regards to some of the activities of his distance learning and e-learning promotion, because they were not aware of what this prophet of e-learning and distance learning was trying to give to Nigeria. And today we are caught up with this. Even with the COVID-19, what we have discovered is that the Dubai Leadership Conference has moved to virtual learning. And that is the platform that we are today even using to honor him. Next. So we are saying that he has been working with UNESCO listed universities and he's providing quality education accessible to matured learners worldwide via distance learning and blended learning. And if Nigeria knew what he was doing and did not think that he was just disrupting the academic learning platform in Nigeria, by now a lot of universities would have learned from him, but rather he was being persecuted. And I think that the person we are honoring today is a shining light of distance learning, e-learning, and leadership that deserves to be emulated and commended for his foresight and doggedness in trying to be a good promoter and advocate for distance learning and e-learning in Nigeria. And so just like Shakia said, let the prophet be honored at home. Next. So in conclusion, we know that all the higher institutions of learning are in this problem, trying to move from face-to-face to online and keep their students learning. But for today, because of the strike and because of the lack of platform, all the learners in higher institutions in Nigeria, almost 90% are virtually doing nothing, we are at a standstill. So I say this is the appropriate moment that they have to move decisively to institutionalize technology-based teaching. And therefore, higher education, like I said in the title, we are in this together. It is either we swim together and get it right, or we drown together and get it wrong. Next. So let the prophet be honored at home. I wish a very happy birthday to our great mentor and a wonderful person, Professor Iornem. Next. Next. So thank you very much. We are in this together. It's either we sink or we swim together.
Thank you very much, Professor Moti. Thank you for the data that you've shared with the challenges that Nigeria and indeed the universities in Nigeria are facing, and how we need to take urgent steps to be able to survive the new normal. And so, like I said earlier on, we're not going to take questions after his presentation. If you have any questions, just make a note of it. Probably some of the answers, you may find it in the second paper. And so at the end of the second paper, we will then take all the questions together, and then we'll have the speakers respond to whatever comments you may have put down there in the chat or you may have raised. So at this juncture, I would like to unmute my distinguished Professor Stevena Ebolocha Ugba.
Well, let me first thank Professor Moti for a brilliant presentation, loaded with quite a bit of data, which helps us to put everything in perspective. I also want to thank the organizers, especially Shadrach, Dr. Shadrach, who obviously had the foresight to do this, along with a friend of mine on TeamNet that I like to call the father of Jesus, Mr. Nashikaya. I'm sure you know, I know you're there, right? So congrats on putting this together. And of course, a lot has been said about Prof. If we started talking about him, we probably wouldn't leave this room for a few days. I find it quite coincidental that it took a crisis for people to now be able to realize what his life's work has been about. Now, you have to remember that when people have passions and they pursue it doggedly, something happens. And in his own case, he didn't allow anything to get in the way of his passion. One thing to know about Professor Iornem is that he has devoted his life. So at various times in his life, even while pursuing other things, he has devoted himself to a life of service. He did this as a politician, as an educator, and of course you've heard from the previous presenter how passionate he has been about distance learning, which is an offshoot of what we're talking about today, which is online learning. He's also a publisher and an avid researcher. So just in case you didn't know, we could go on about other things that he's done. So I do want to say kudos to Professor Iornem for a very distinguished life, which a lot of people may not know how you have sweated for democratization of education, perhaps for many years to come. And that's really what we're talking about today, being able to democratize education, making it available to everyone who is able to have access. And access is what it's all about. So I find it apt that today, especially in light of the COVID pandemic, we have come full circle. We're talking about other ways to learn. And I do want to start this presentation by letting you know that one of the things that I preoccupied myself early in my career with was learning styles, how students learn. Of course, a good example is how we started. And usually, a good teacher in the classroom wants to be able to appeal to students who are learning in different ways, whether they are visual learners, whether they're learners who are disabled, and so on and so forth. The different ways that people learn. Some are auditory learners. They have to hear it to understand it. I call myself a visual learner. I have to see it sometimes to understand it. And so, as you can imagine, Dr. Moti was definitely applying his technique to visual learners as well as auditory learners, because he has the visual and he's also speaking, which is wonderful. But here we are today talking about what has happened to global education since the pandemic. For us in the diaspora, global education has a different taste and a different feel. And sometimes we wish we could package what it is that we see where we are in our host countries and take it to our homeland. But let me start with just a little bit of statistics relating to what education means globally. And of course, keep in mind that the projections for what education would be in 10 years would really blow your minds when you think about where it is today. So most data out there suggests that global education, the sector itself that is only second to healthcare. And the dollar amount that is tagged on to global education is the $2.2 trillion. $2.2 trillion. Now, that number is projected to reach 20 trillion by 2030. Now, see the big jump to 20 trillion by 2030 if we keep maintaining the trends that were pre-COVID, because this data obviously is not from 2020. This data is from 2017 and provided by Euromonitor report. The projection for that probably includes everything that we've talked about in terms of infrastructure. So that's the projection for global education. Now, prior to COVID-19, there were so many justifications for why online learning was necessary. Especially in the US, the assumption was that online education was not going to completely replace in-person education, even though people in our line of work had our fears that yes, online may replace us one day. But we could see just now that it is not possible to replace an in-person education because sometimes there are glitches that occur in technology. But enough of that. One of the things that was a verifiable justification for online learning was to bring education to place-based individuals, as they would call them in the US. Place-based individuals, people who have some form of physical disability, who are unable to do the commute involved in in-person learning. So bring education to them, use the infrastructure necessary, and beam education to them. So that was one justification. Of course, there are so many, but I'm only going to focus on two justifications. Then the other justification for early folks who were pioneers in online education was, let's provide a way for working professionals to seek professional development, even while employed. So if I'm currently doing a job that I like, but eventually I would like to do something else, I can go to school online and get the necessary know-how to be able to do the job that I'm predicting I'll do in the future. So those are the two that I chose to focus on, which is obviously justification for online education. And this is all prior to COVID-19. So early pioneers of online learning had to think about such things as whether to offer online education in real time or not. And interestingly, I had occasion to participate in synchronous models of learning, which was offered by a company out of Southern California known as University Access. University Access at the time felt it was a pioneer, and it went around to different colleges trying to do pilots. So they came to the College of Business and they asked us if we were interested in doing a pilot. Of course, you don't refuse to try something. So this pilot was to use synchronous platform for a business communication course. And of course, we went back and forth on how many students it would be. You have to remember, this was in 1998. This was way before we got to where we had video that was very good, before we had cell phones and whatnot. So everything you were doing as an instructor was based on the efficiency of your campus infrastructure. So University Access made the offer, and we chose a pilot course, a business communication pilot course to do it in. And so over time and debating back and forth, we agreed on a class size not to exceed 15 students. And the reason was there was no video, there was audio, and there was chat. And the entire class session was an hour, 50 minutes. And we were supposed to now be able to make that presentation to the class, teach content, and also be able to take student questions. To cut a long story short, the reality of it was not what we thought. We all got excited. The students were excited. I was excited. The company was paying me extra to do this. But at the end of it, I would write a report to either recommend that the university welcome them and that we use it for this course. Now, the problem with making the recommendation was that the course had more than written content, okay? Business communication course was teaching students employment skills. So there was an aspect of the course that involved employment techniques such as interviewing, also preparation for jobs such as preparing your resume and preparing job letters and all. So I didn't see how also we could effectively do presentations. We didn't have video. In an in-person class for business communication course, the student could present in front of a classroom. This was not going to be achievable because all we had to work with was text, and we had audio, okay? And then the connection time for everybody that was in the class was different because everybody was tuning in from home, and we weren't anywhere near what we have right now. The infrastructure was simply not going to achieve the goals of University Access. Unfortunately, in spite of how well the outing was financially for me, my recommendation to the dean at the time was that we not do it until infrastructure had gotten to where students would actually benefit. And so we moved away from that model. That was pre-COVID, and that was synchronous environment. And you have to remember, in order to effectively do synchronous learning, you have to have the bandwidth, you have to have the platform, you have to have everything, you have to dot your I and cross your T's in order for it to work. So we didn't have that. And so that was my early taste of synchronous online teaching. Now, enter COVID in 2020. COVID, with its global reach, caused everyone to start looking at online as possibly a place to go and learn and teach. And it, of course, Cambridge University was in line as one of the early adopters of moving everything online. My campus, California State University, which is one of the largest public education systems in the US, announced also after March 2020 that they would not resume in-person learning in the fall, and that everything would move online. Now, this is 23 branch campuses. Of course, we had practiced online teaching and learning in different capacities. In fact, the online certificate that I had in teaching was from California State University, East Bay. So we had practiced, we have the platform, and we have been encouraging faculty to teach online. So there was something to build on. Now, if you think about adapting to the COVID situation, let's step a little bit backwards, pre-COVID, to see what the American educational system has had to deal with prior to COVID. Now, most of you may know that one of the issues that American public education has had to deal with is active shooter situations, which is campus shootings. So that in and of itself raised itself to a level of an ongoing crisis in the US. So campus shootings were a thing. And then we had natural disasters, which would often come out in the community. And the university is not an isolated environment, it's part of the community. We also had instances where campuses trained for fires. In case there was a fire, you have a drill. So universities in the United States were used to having crisis teams on hand. And crisis teams were formed with university faculty, students, as well as staff, all playing various roles on the crisis team. So you had to have people who were coordinators, and you had communicators, you had people who did all kinds of things as part of the crisis team. So they already had practice doing this. Just like if you think about earthquakes, the one thing you can know is that campuses in California do drills for earthquakes because they know that earthquakes can happen at any time. So when COVID came, even though it took everyone by surprise, there were around campuses in the US efforts to drill up those kinds of scenarios that we have had crisis teams attend to. So it obviously led to some campuses being more prepared. It doesn't mean everybody was across board was prepared for COVID. COVID took everyone by surprise globally. And a lot of people didn't have time to prepare. But remember, one of the differences perhaps between the system that we operate in of institutions of higher learning in the US and elsewhere, and I can only speak for their system because that's what I'm familiar with, is that universities in and of themselves are, in some instances, bigger than some cities. You know, some universities have their own police, they have hospitals, they're operating in a multifunctional capacity. So, and in some instances, the university is the active employer in that particular state or in that city where it's located. So universities are multifunctional, and that means every single aspect of their capacity needs to be considered when you're doing a COVID preparation. What do you do with campus police? What do you do with campus athletics? All of those things have to be considered. And so we can look at three major ways that the US institutions of higher learning have already set out to deal with COVID. The three models that are very common, and in the order that campuses have prepared them, I will discuss them. Some campuses are thinking about what they call modified in-person, which would be their own response to COVID. In other words, in fall 2020, they will open their doors, but it will be a modified opening of doors. So you wouldn't have, if you had a classroom that had 200 students, that number will be scaled down considerably with social distancing and all of the other lingo that has come out of COVID. So the modified model is actually one that a lot of the Ivy Leagues, the Harvards, the Stanfords are trying to use post-COVID. And then we also have a second model, which is called hybrid which is a combination of in-person and online. In other words, the campus will have some courses that they're offering online, and they will have some courses that they're offering in a brick and mortar classroom. So that is also available. And then the third model is 100% online. Now, even though you have these three separate models, there are campuses that are doing all three. For instance, City University of New York at Albany has a statement that was sent to parents by the provost and senior vice president of academic affairs. And the statement had other messages in it, but what caught my attention was what was said about how students could learn. It said, to allow for physical distancing, classes will be delivered through a combination of in-person, hybrid, and online. But further, students will have the opportunity to request an all online schedule if they prefer. So this campus has decided that they're going to adopt all three, and they're going to see how effective it is for them. But remember that one of the hardest problems for US universities to face is not necessarily everything we are talking about in terms of platform, efficiency of the platform, and so on. US universities stand to lose a lot of money in the next school year because of the revenue that comes from international students who are seeking education in the US, and they are paying non-resident fees at a higher rate than students who are resident in the US. So if due to travel advisories or lockdowns, these students are not able to return to school in the fall, that would further cut into the budget of universities. And that's a source of serious concern for universities in the US. But even these models that I have presented here, there are a few hiccups that experts talk about when it comes to online delivery. One of the hiccups to online delivery, obviously, is the quality of instruction. Quality of instruction, varies when it comes to the online environment. And what happened at the onset of COVID was not the fact that students were used to a certain way of learning. Students who were in an in-person learning environment all of a sudden found themselves on an online platform. Now, in order to get to where you're talking about quality of instruction, you have to train faculty to be able to adapt. In some instances, most campuses had spring break. Spring break in the United States is 1 week. 1 week for faculty to learn or relearn how they were teaching in a semester that was already in session. So that was a top hill to get through. And then you also have to worry about whether or not the students are learning the way they're supposed to. One of the things that came to my attention while doing research for this presentation was the fact that at the moment, at least as of May 2020, 25 lawsuits are in progress for parents who are suing universities, claiming that their children are not getting the quality that they are paying for because schools converted to online learning. And of course, quality of instruction is what they are specifically referring to. And then, Dr. Modi talked about connectivity. Connectivity is not the only problem, is not only an African or Nigerian problem. In the US, we also have a digital divide that sees people who are economically disadvantaged not being part of the system. The only thing, of course, that separates us in the US from Africa and the rest of the world is probably the rate of adoption, because 2019 stats say that 90% of Americans have access. So that's a huge difference in terms of that particular number. But connectivity issues exist nevertheless. And typically you'll find this with people who are economically disadvantaged, especially minorities. So connectivity issue exists, but not at the rate that we are speaking of, perhaps in Nigeria. And then some of the other considerations would be whether or not the university would choose a specific format. in real time or pack the content so students will have access to it. Now, some subjects lend themselves to that scenario of placing the content and allowing students to have access to it. The sciences, medicine may not necessarily thrive when you do that, because you need the ability for students to engage in practicals. And then, of course, you have to consider the needs of hearing and vision impaired students. I have experience with those kinds of scenarios where you have to adapt your classroom to the needs of a vision impaired student because they're joining your class. It changes how you are going to teach for the semester, because all of a sudden you're trying to figure out, if this person cannot see what I'm doing, they cannot see me writing on the board, they cannot see any of my slides, but they're attending an in-person class, how do I make it possible for them to see without seeing? But the online environment allows that, because you can do closed caption, and that person has access to the content that you're trying to share. Now, just to quickly go on to what the Nigerian tertiary education can learn from US higher education handling of COVID. Well, a lot of what has been said by Dr. Moti is very disheartening. And by the way, Dr. Moti, I graduated from Uniport as well. So it's nice to know that we're number 10 in the ranking. I think that's quite heartwarming, even though number 10 is not exactly number 10 in the world, but that's still good. Well, the one thing that I saw as one of the things that we need to work on before anything else is the need to plan ahead, knowing that crises are inevitable. And in this case, this one took the entire world by surprise. But planning ahead, COVID is now giving us an opportunity to plan ahead, something that we normally wouldn't have the ability to do. So being able to plan ahead means to train faculty, to train students, but you can train them. If you don't have the infrastructure, they really can't do much. And I'm reminded of when we were going to school in Nigeria and students were enrolling in computer science courses, but may not have access to computers. We cannot do that in online learning. Because while students may be able to memorize the content that you're teaching them in computer science, when we're talking about online learning, students need to have infrastructure, faculty need to have infrastructure and access as well. So the need to plan ahead is one of the things that we need to primarily begin to do. Can Nigerian universities, for instance, prepare faculty to be ready on day one to teach online? Not too long ago, I decided on my own to do an online teaching certificate program. It's not like I didn't have anything to do, but it came in handy when I relocated from the US to Russia, because all of a sudden I actually could fit my class in my travel bag and come over here and teach from here. Of course, there were all kinds of things that got in the way, such as time zone, being able to adapt to a 10-hour time zone and all. But that training and getting that certificate allowed me to work on my own pedagogy and how it fits with the content that I want to share with students. So the first thing that we need to work on is that training of trainers, because you have to train the faculty in order for them to succeed. And if faculty cannot adapt to technology, that becomes a real problem right there. So being able to do that is one of the first recommendations. And then also thinking of crisis situations such as the one we're experiencing, Nigerian universities need to work on creating crisis teams. Crisis teams are just the norm everywhere in the world now. And you have to think of who constitutes your crisis team, who is playing a leadership role, who is playing a role in communication, who is playing all manners of roles that will make the crisis something that can be handled by the university. So you do need those to be considered before crisis hits. And this is the best time to plan now that schools are out. You also need to prepare to deploy more than one model of the ones that are done in the US to accommodate more students and faculty. Some faculty may prefer to teach in person. If they do, how do you accommodate them and still keep the students safe from the coronavirus? If there are students who prefer to learn online, can you accommodate their needs regardless of where they are tuning into class from? Now, the other thing that I don't believe the universities have to do themselves, but which perhaps overall governance can take into consideration, is the participation factor, which is what happens in the US. One of the things that I wish to share with you is the financial commitment of the US government to the institutions of higher learning in the COVID environment. Of a $2 trillion set aside as a stimulus package for COVID by the US government, approximately $14.2 billion is earmarked as emergency relief for institutions of higher learning. Now, that means that while we work it out as universities, we also need help. Help can come directly from governance. And that's where we need to up our game as a country and see the role that government can play in responding to a crisis and helping an institution to dig out of a crisis. So government response in a crisis such as the current pandemic can go a long way in helping. Now, I do see plenty of opportunities, even though there are a few challenges that we may talk about in a few minutes. One of the opportunities I see is the one created by COVID itself. The fact that now that we have a crisis that shows that maybe we may not be able to congregate like we normally did and do in-person classes in brick and mortar environments, perhaps we can consider being able to put the classroom in a box. A lot of people across the country have cell phones, but can we make it such that Wi-Fi is accessible? Wi-Fi is the way that the class can be beamed. Can we make it such that the class can be received on the cell phone, even if somebody doesn't have a laptop and they don't have a tablet, they don't have any computer access, can they access coursework on their telephone? That is something we can work on. Also, the explosion of exclusively online learning platforms should not inhibit what we're doing. Now, one of the things that I did that led to my doing a certificate in online teaching was that I enrolled for a MOOC, what they call a MOOC, a massive open online course, which is one of the ways that the Ivy Leagues in the US are using to create visibility for themselves. They offer these courses for free. Thousands of people sign up for free all across the world. The course I took prior to doing the certificate was a course on women's health. And in my classroom during the fall of 2016, there were at least 2,000 students, one professor and several tech helps. And of course, you know that cannot be in real time. The professor is using packed content for students to learn in their different time zones whenever you wake up. But there are obviously certain guidelines to follow, such as a deadline when the assignment is due. So regardless of where you are, you do need to turn that in. So being able to increase our learning platforms could also help to create that visibility that we're talking about. Nigerian professors are some of the best in the world, and there's absolutely no reason we can't showcase what they're doing, even if we have to offer those MOOCs to draw traffic to our space. And then, of course, one of the other opportunities I'm seeing is now there will be increased pressure to lower the cost of education. Because if you're going to move education exclusively online, you're not going to look at all the other costs for running a brick and mortar classroom. So obviously that's a plus right there. And then, of course, if you're not going to have increased costs of learning, we may be seeing just Professor Iornem's dream, which is that of democratizing learning by the use of technology, as something that is really already here. And then some of the challenges that I see in the Nigerian context would be power supply, as mentioned by Professor Moti, which without power supply, you're not going to have reliable online delivery. Of course, we have those disparities that we talked about, except our own margins far exceed that of developed countries in terms of access to technology. The other problem that we might encounter would be older faculty adopting to technology. I like to say that one of the challenges that faculty faced in the US as soon as COVID hit was faculty who were on the cusp of retiring, finding out that all of a sudden they have to go online, and maybe prior to that time, they had not even used Blackboard to grade students. So that was obviously a challenge, and this could also be a challenge that we have in terms of older faculty adapting. But let me close by saying that it is my wish that the post-COVID recovery period will avail us in Nigeria the opportunity to think long and hard about the impact of what I call our epileptic academic calendar. If you think about the fact that every time you turn around, universities are on strike, that's really not fair to the students. It's not fair to them in terms of competitiveness, because if a student goes to school and the program is supposed to be 4 years, it takes them 7 years to graduate, they're obviously at a huge disadvantage in terms of cohorts elsewhere, and they cannot afford to be competitive in that regard. And so I would like to end my discussion with a quote from a US Supreme Court Justice, Sonia Sotomayor, whose sentiments I share. She says, until we get equality in education, we won't have an equal society. And if she's saying this in the US, it tells you that we still have a long way to go to bridge that gap. And so I wish to stop here to take questions. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Professor Stevina Evolucha, for the presentation. I believe you will all agree why we had to put this paper as the second paper. It's more like the icing on the cake to what Professor Moti has presented. So when we're experiencing technical difficulties, some were suggesting we have the second paper first, but I believe by now you understand why it is better to have her speak second. So thank you very much. Again, just based on my observation over the few months that we've been running programs virtually, technology has been a main issue, a main problem. When we have programs like this, we find out that participants from developing countries like Nigeria and Ghana, sometimes they experience internet connection problems. And what we just experienced today is also a practical situation of what happens. So we saw that from the onset, even when Professor Moti joined, there were times when his network was breaking. And I thought it was the problem from my own ends, but when you took over, we didn't have any technology or internet connection problems, even though you say sometimes there are problems, even in developed countries. But this is the reality. And so part of the recommendations that you've made are the things whereby we would have to begin to look at each of these recommendations or proposals and see how we can move forward. So thank you very much, Prof. At this moment, this juncture, I would just before we start taking questions and answers, I would like to give Professor David Iornem a chance to give him 10 minutes to make his own contribution, and we'll then open the lines for questions and answers. So, Prof, you can unmute yourself. Yes.
Good evening. From Nigeria, it is good evening. To the erudite presenters, Professor Moti and Professor Stevina Evolucha Uba. I have learned a lot from the presentations of both. and exposure to their contribution by the public, both in Nigeria and in other lands, can pave the way for better understanding of issues involved in open learning, e-learning, or distance learning, as the case may be, and also to greater acceptance of this model of learning that is properly now being called as the new normal, since COVID-19 has made it practically impossible or difficult or dangerous for people to congregate together. Yes, you know, Professor Evulocha Uba was talking about the older faculty. Now I'm part of it, and someone who is supposed to be assisting me is interrupting my presentation by insisting that he will make the environment better for me to present. So that was what was causing the distraction. And now, let me say that sometimes I'm surprised that open learning, e-learning, or distance learning is regarded as less effective than the so-called normal learning, face-to-face. I'm surprised because if you go down into history, you will discover that quality people have been produced through distance learning. And this happened even when the facility of ICT, by facility I mean the ease created by ICT in learning, this was completely absent. And for instance, in those clients which I'm talking about, it used to take 14 days for a letter to come from the UK to Nigeria. And then if you post from Nigeria, it would take maybe even more time. Yet, the postal system was used to educate people, and we produce first-class persons even in that era. I want to talk about Awolowo, Obafemi Awolowo, a retired lawyer and politician. When you read through the works of Awolowo, you will see quality there, and in the way he performed as a politician, as a businessman, as a lawyer in court, would show clearly that this person was a person of quality. Yet, this man studied Bachelor of Commerce at home at Abeokuta, and he later moved to Lagos because of work, a change of work. And he did it completely at home in Nigeria, in Lagos, through the University of London. When he finished the Bachelor of Commerce, he now took the LLB, Bachelor of Laws, again, completely in Nigeria. He never went to the UK. He completed his degree. Then he wanted to be the Queen's Counsel. That was when we can say he had the benefit of 4 corners of a classroom. He went to London for 6 months to train under other lawyers to become Queen's Counsel. See quality person produced by distance learning. And again, Professor Chiko Obi the first Nigerian professor of mathematics, and a person who, there was a mathematical problem which a human head could not solve until computer was invented. Even after the computer solved the problem, he kept cracking his head that he must solve that problem using human head. And he went into the Guinness Book of Records as the first human being to solve that mathematical problem. You can talk, you can go on and on. There is Afe Babalola, there is M.T. Mbu. There are many persons who studied completely at home. And accountancy and banking, it is only recently that you could find degree courses in universities. People were taught professional courses, and they took them to the level of graduate level, where they have performed very high quality executive jobs in companies that have succeeded. You know, all these are products of distance learning, which now we can call e-learning or digital learning. So there is no basis for underrating or for being afraid that adopting this mode of learning can reduce quality. So there is every reason why we should very confidently promote distance learning. And actually, my motivation in distance learning came from the performance of these persons. When I was a young child in secondary school, I read about these persons. So I know so that somebody can even stay at home and study. So when I became a student at the Kaduna Polytechnic, I decided to study more than what I was being taught. And I was able to complete the Chartered Institute of Marketing in 2.5 years, instead of 4.5 years that was the normal study period. And so I knew that this will work. Of course, I paid a lot in terms of rejection by system. For instance, I applied to a university in the UK. They organized a test which was taken at the British Council in Kaduna. I passed and I was admitted for a master's degree. When I went for interview in Nigeria for scholarship, they looked at my credential and they say, you finished this program in only 2.5 years. How can that be equivalent to a degree? I said, well, the Chartered Institute of Marketing is equivalent to a degree. And the people who admitted me, they knew that this is what I had. And they shook their head. They said, David, we know you are a brilliant person. You got Division 1 in your school start, and even in this so-called Chartered Institute, you are getting A's. But we don't believe that somebody can complete a degree level program within this time, no matter how hard you study. Okay, so that was one price I paid. But enough of that. I want to say that we can train people from outside normal learning, and they will be as good as other persons. It has happened in accounting, it has happened in banking, it has happened in marketing, it has happened in economics. Now, in the past, here in Nigeria, it was possible for people to study for even general certificate of education from outside the secondary school system. Again, it was possible to study A-level, advanced level, from outside the university, outside the school system. And when you got your A-level, you could go and enter university straight. Strangely, these courses were discontinued, but I am very happy that last year, the Federal Ministry of Education reintroduced the GCE O-level for people who are at home but who want to study. which is good. And they have gone ahead and reintroduced the A-level program for people who are outside the university. And if you get 2 papers at A-level, you can enter a Nigerian university at 200 level, which is a good development. And so this is a tacit recognition of the importance of an alternative way for people to upgrade themselves so that they can move from one level of education to the other. So with this, I know that Nigerians will key into it, and it will work much better if e-learning is adopted as the order of the day. And the society, I think, is ready for that. Unfortunately, it is even in the universities that you find some resistance. Can you imagine that the National Open University, which is a university that is supposed to be e-learning based, is also closed down? They have closed down because of COVID-19. And why have they closed down? Because instead of being a distance learning institution, e-learning, online learning, they opened campuses, study centers. And so people were attending, and they were taking even attendance, that if you don't get 75% attendance, you will not pass. That is not e-learning, that's not distance learning, that is not online learning, that is not open learning. It's a very wrong signal that the National Open University in Nigeria has sent. They are supposed to be the champion of open learning, e-learning, and all that. Then work-based learning, which is another platform that can benefit a lot from acceptance of e-learning or online learning. People who are working in their work, in their places of work, they can connect with universities and relate what they are learning to courses offered in the universities. And this will accelerate their understanding of issues involved in what they are learning, because learning we need, or theory we meet with practical, and that clash will bring light and greater insight into knowledge. So there are a lot of opportunities that we can tap from accepting and implementing e-learning in Nigeria and in other lands. I want to say just a few words about what my own organization or our company has been able to do in that direction. We have a division within the new idea management consultants called Open Learning Network. And through this, the new idea management consultants connects to other important organizations or institutions that are promoting distance learning. And some of these institutions, fortunately for us, include UNESCO-listed universities. And one of them has permanently been rated higher than any Nigerian university since the rating started. No Nigerian university has ever been rated close to Heriot-Watt University. We are consultants for students who are studying by distance learning or online learning for programs, degree programs of Heriot-Watt University. Again, we recently gained access to assisting students to study degree programs of Anglia Ruskin University in the UK. That one too, that university is rated higher than any Nigerian university. And we support students in Africa and in Nigeria to study through these two institutions, and there are others too in the Philippines and in South America, and they are all UNESCO listed universities. So through that method, people who study through us and get a degree are able to have a degree from a UNESCO listed university. So when you are trying to employ and you are insisting that the person must come from a recognized university, and you go and take the UNESCO list of universities, the handbook, you will see the university listed there. So through this way, we are able to assist people who are genuinely interested in gaining quality education through distance learning. It is one of the contributions that has helped even some academics in Nigeria. And I want to support the recommendation being made by Professor Eguloja that for e-learning to be adopted and implemented successfully in Nigeria, there is need for the training of teachers first, the faculty. They have to accept it, and they have to learn how to do it. Then we have to also train the students. In fact, with the student, it's very easy. They want to learn, and so they are ready to follow the lecturer or the teachers, any path they take them. If they say, okay, this is what we need to do for you to learn, they will follow. But there's need to train the teachers, condition their mind to the new normal, and then they need to also train the students. In the United States, there were some universities who discovered that students were ahead of some lecturers because they were better at ICT. And they wanted the lecturers to also be good in ICT. And so they introduced programs which sounded very nice, and lecturers keyed into it. The program was called Teaching Digital Natives. How do you teach those digital natives? You are an old faculty, you are the digital world, you are the foreigner in some sense in that world. So when you get into that world, how do you teach the people who are natives, who know so much about IT? You must have a northern acquaintance of the issues in IT before you can teach these people. Otherwise, you would embarrass yourself. You know, some students, they will sit in their own class and they have their own phone. When you want to teach a particular thing, they will immediately Google and they will get to that topic. And when you are talking nonsense, they know you are talking nonsense. And they just keep quiet because they want to be polite. And for a lecturer to be able to take care of such a situation whereby he brings himself up to speed to what his students know in terms of ICT, so that there can be a proper symbiosis in learning. Relearning the skills of teaching is the way forward. So thank you very much for this seminar that has been held using Zoom. And I want to appreciate the presenters and the organizers that they are able to do this in honor of my birthday. I feel highly humbled, and I want to use this opportunity to say that this will inspire me to do, to do even more. And I'm glad that God has been so much on our side, because sometimes God pushes us to areas that we never even planned. And then we land in those areas, and we discover it's a big opportunity to be of service to humanity. One such occasion or situation that happened recently is our acquisition of a 41-year-old school in Bogo called Malami College. Malami College was initiated sometime in 1972. And there are 3 institutions. There is a boarding primary school called Robert F. Kennedy Primary School. There is a secondary school called Malami College, and there is a college of education, all in one place, located or situated on a 5.6 hectare piece of land. And this acquisition will enable us to really democratize education, because there will be a lot of opportunities for scholarship for people who are disadvantaged, and there will be scholarship for people who are extraordinarily brilliant, because we want to do that. David Iornem has come here and put up a very big basketball court. And his ambition is to produce people who will go and play basketball in America. So it's a very delightful acquisition that we have achieved, and we want to thank Mr. Andaka, who has graciously made it possible for us to acquire this educational institution. And in honor of his legacy, we are not going to change the name. It will be there because we want him and his wife, who started the institution many years ago, to share in that legacy by continuing with the name they chose. After all, the name suits very much what we stand for. Our other institutions are called Commonwealth University, Commonwealth College of Technology. And what we mean by Commonwealth is that God has given us inborn knowledge, which is common to everybody. All we need to do is to activate it. Then you can fly. And Malami means inborn, which is the same thing as the Commonwealth. So the name agrees with our philosophy. And we also want to allow the family that started the school to share in the legacy. And so we are keeping the name. Thank you very, very much for this opportunity.
Yeah, thank you very much, Professor David. We appreciate your contribution to education and promoting distance learning. I wouldn't want to take much of our time. We are still within time, and I would open the floor now for questions regarding the presentations that have been made by the first speaker, Professor Moti, the second speaker, Professor Evulocha, and Prof's contribution as well. And I can see Sam Agua's hand is up. Sam, please, you can unmute yourself to speak.
Can you hear?
Loud and clear. Sam? Sam? Your audio is low. The volume is very low.
Up as much?
Yes, now, yes. Okay, now I can hear you.
Yeah, I'm not using a headphone. Yeah.
Yes.
When Professor Moti read out the UNESCO 26% budgetary allocation to university, which we have not even met 10% in the last 10 years, it got me very curious because for me, what we are talking about, using the COVID situation to democratize education via e-learning seems even more far away. And he also mentioned the issue of the ASU strike, which I found also quite frustrating in many ways. I was just imagining in my head that if every union or every association in Nigeria sticks to improving their systems and they go on strikes, how that would be, because I know the health sector, the water sector, all the sectors are having their issues. Well, thank God for ASU, the more strike union and that. You see, the issue of...
So if you want
hello?
to
Hello?
Yes, please.
Hello?
Sorry about that.
Yeah, this issue of democratizing learning is actually a very critical policy issue, because as far as I'm concerned, the National Universities Commission and the Ministry of Education are the core of frustrating this many years back. And now that our eyes are opening and we are trying to see things better, my only advice can be for unions like ASU and the academics in universities to look back again and let's see how we can run a system that is practical and realistic to the times. And then in respect of Professor Stevena, when she talked about training the trainer, I think this is also going to be another issue, because though I don't have statistics, I can bet you that most conventional universities, the teaching system, the lecturers have this orientation of it must be face-to-face. It must be something you see and you are facing the students directly. Here too, I want to caution that in our bid to see that we democratize this education, we have to be very careful and slow with government. Let's keep pushing. But you know, these guys, if we are not careful, we may just launch into saying, okay, let's all go online. And then there's so many other issues may come in between. So while I appreciate these presentations, I want to seriously sound and note that our first port of call areas that we can get critical cooperation to drive this is not even the universities. It is the NUC and the Ministry of Education. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Sam Agua. Thank you. So I'm not sure it's a question, it's your own, the issues that you've raised that are of concern to you, but I don't know if either Professor Moti or Professor Stevena. Okay, Professor Stevena, please.
I want to appreciate the speaker, Mr. Sam Agua. It's interesting, I didn't include that in my conversation only because the COVID scenario didn't lend to it. I remember joining the faculty way back in the fall of 1990. And at the time, there was a looming labor dispute between the university and faculty. And so I was getting all excited about, oh, we're going to go on strike. Of course, strike means you get a few days off work. So to my biggest surprise, I got the shock of my life when I said, oh, the California Faculty Association is getting ready to strike. Let's take a day on Monday. So I'm warming up not to go to class, only to be told by a faculty member that, oh, by the way, our memorandum of understanding negotiated between faculty and the administration says that we do not strike on the day we are teaching. I remember asking this individual to please say what they were saying slowly because it seemed like I didn't hear accurately. And he told me, yes, we don't strike on the day we are teaching. We can strike on the day we are not teaching. And I remember thinking at the time, whoever was party to writing that memorandum of understanding must have had a few shots of vodka, because how do you strike on a day that you're not working? But now that this came up here in terms of our conversation, and of course, as you know, Professor Moti in his presentation talked about strikes that were already ongoing. I think it's quite possible that one of the things that will need to be revisited would be the terms or the memorandum of understanding of faculty, given the do no harm, which really faculty should be guided by. And if do no harm means that we do not do harm to the students that we pledge allegiance to teach, then perhaps we can copy something that is going on elsewhere. Yes, the teaching conditions may not be totally the best, but I suspect that if the goal is not to disrupt the learners, then we may have to learn a thing or two from other systems where striking, if you're striking, then it would be on the day that you're not teaching. So the students are still benefiting. Perhaps you will not go to your committee meetings or any meetings on campus, but you would do your bid and teach, because I think that would change a lot of what we're going through in terms of educating our students. That's just a comment I wanted to make regarding that. Thank you.
Let me just comment briefly before we take another question. Yeah, definitely what Samagwa has raised is quite important and critical. Definitely, as all the two presentations have shown, you cannot completely replace in-person learning with e-learning. It's not practicable for the obvious reasons that we have also given from experience. But these are very complementary learning platforms that when you have a crisis like this, even if you don't have a crisis, you can even make it easier for the staff or the faculty and for the students. Courses that are amenable for e-learning, you don't necessarily need to go to the class every time. Yes, the issue of training, I also brought it up. And I want to tell Sam and Professor Iornem that if you want this e-learning training, it's going to cost the university or the government a lot of money, because it is not just a matter of the staff being old, but 90% or more of the staff of Nigerian universities, as I know, are not amenable to e-learning platforms, because we have only been programmed to go to in-person. Some of us got to know these things, not that the university taught us. It was part of our own personal learning, and then we got involved with Professor Iornem, and we started to develop and so on and so forth. So that is one thing we need to do, and unfortunately, what we should be doing now, we are not doing it. The other issue is the issue of funding that are raised. If you look at Nigerian budget for the past 10 years, if you accumulate it, the budget that went to education is 4.1 trillion for the past 10 years. The whole of education, I'm not talking about university education. Now, if not for TED Fund, most universities wouldn't have had facilities. Just go to any state university, federal university, and you see the building, you will see prescribed on the board, TED Fund, TED Fund, TED Fund, TED Fund. So you see, this is what is going on. And let me just give you a comparison. In 2019, Harvard had a budget of $40.9 billion, not Naira. That is just one university. This wiped out the budget for education in Nigeria for 10 years. So how do you compete? Now, universities were told by Prof. Uba that, look, they are giving some packages and palliative. Since the COVID started, the Nigerian government has not released any kobo to any university that prepare, we are going to resume one day. None, not one kobo has been given up to this moment. Rather, what they have been doing is that, okay, ASU is on strike, they have stopped the salaries. So you are not even motivating the staff to do anything. Now, they are calling for a moratorium. Yes, personally, on a personal basis, I don't like strikes because of the disruptions they bring in the education system. But if you look over the years, the only way unions have been able to get the government do anything has been through strike. We can't continue like this. We must look for a model to sort out this problem once and for all. And some of us thought that during this COVID that we were forced to close down, why not harmonize with the unions, solve this problem so that we go back? And that is what I'm saying. I'm not a prophet of doom, but I'm just saying with the attitude government is showing, a minister will say, I'm 10 years older than you, I've been minister twice, I've been a governor, I'm a Lagos boy, I'm a Koi boy. They wouldn't want to interact. If you have that attitude, nothing works. And that is why nothing is working. And so unfortunately, like what Prof. Iornem even said, the university that you set up to be a distant learning, e-learning university, no facility has been put there. Rather, we went into the model that has always been there. So why did you create Open University? So I think we need actually to sit down, just like he's saying, to think whether we actually like to have universities in Nigeria. And this matter, again, finally, before somebody comes in, you do not distribute universities as democratic dividends. You don't run universities and make money. Universities take a lot of money. Government wakes up today and says, Northeast, take this university. Southeast, take that university. Oh, this state doesn't have a university, take. And how are they recruiting? The same vice chancellor, facilities, registrars, students, classes, buses, everything. And then you have universities that are taking 3,000 students, others 25. Why can't you harmonize, make one university a world-class university that can have as much as 50,000 students? You are using the same staff, same faculty. You are duplicating matters. See, when we talk to government on these issues, they think we are stupid and mad people. But this COVID-19 has shown us, even if we open now, I want to tell our audience, Nigerian universities are not prepared. If the technology didn't put off down, you would have seen the slides I gave. You have a class, a lecture hall that takes 60 students, and you are having about 120, 200 coming in, sitting on the floor, standing on the window. It's impossible to do distant learning. I mean, to do physical distancing if you get back. How will you do it? If you break into 20 lectures, I can't take 20 lectures for one course. It's not possible. So these are issues that we should have been working out now to wait. When do we come back? Thank you. Sorry for taking much time.
Thank you very much, Professor Moti and Professor Stevena. Yes, Malcolm Oka.
Yes, I'm online.
Okay, yes.
Okay, I thank all the presenters. I've actually learned quite a few things from your presentation, and happy birthday, Prof. But I've got two issues that I want to raise. And the first issue is the value of education. And the second issue is funding of education. I know Professor Moti, I've just been talking about funding of education. Stevena talked about that a bit, but you see, value of education, what is the true value of education? And were people going to school because education have been presented as a panacea to a better life? So people go to school and they struggle through school and they get qualifications and they are not quite employable. So one, the government have not placed a very good value on education. And our educational system is not jigged to give skills that will help. Now, by associating with Prof. Iornem here, I picked a lot of skills from him on how you can actually make education practical and apply knowledge to actually make a living. If we live in a society where education must have value, then we must link effective funding to education. So there are societies where students can depend on scholarship. Professor Iornem mentioned scholarship. They can depend on scholarships, but there are also other funding opportunities. There are banks that are prepared to give student loans to take education, knowing that at the end of the day, their education is valuable enough for them to earn a living and pay back those loans. It's common in the society here in the UK for that to happen. You have universities where they are engaging in consultancy and they're bringing students on board to actually teach students transferable skills and make students earn money. I remember when I graduated from the University of Jos initially, I remember I learned something from my then lecturer, what he has learned from America, Professor Ondve Tahuri, who brought in consultancy and brought in all kinds of projects from various places. And those projects were able to, when he put us on those projects to help, just as assistants, we're able to earn. And by earning, we're able to support ourselves. So I think that we should look again at the precise value of education and link education to funding, because if education is valuable, then the banks should be encouraged to begin to develop things that can fund education in terms of soft loans that students may, have for 10 years, 20 years and pay back, or things like that to help students have a proper education. And those are my questions. So ideas towards how that can happen, and how government can be brought in and have buy-in. I know there's a lot of ego going on, but that is why we have a panel of intellectuals to be able to harness their intellectual powers to bring about change. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Malcolm, for your question and contribution. Yes, Professor Stevena?
Yeah, thank you very much for that observation. And of course, one of the big issues in American education is actually the issue of student loans. It's very difficult to go to school without having some of those. It's gotten to where even parents and the general public are worried about, just how long it takes for students to finish paying loans. But what you're suggesting requires stakeholder analysis. Who all wants to be part of that discussion? And the problem that I see is that of awareness for us. Because yes, you could set up something similar to what is done elsewhere. Societally, do we really buy into having loans to go to school? And if you think about even going back to the days of Obiokonkwo, the community puts together money, somebody goes overseas to go to school, they come back, and they bring the value. The education almost seems like a product that they're carrying back to their community. But the observation you're making is very apt. And I think it requires, the problem we also have oftentimes is this whole system, or the way that our mindset is framed to rely exclusively on government. There are things that can be done outside of government. And I think the minute we start thinking about doing things for education that involves concerned individuals who can have participation with something to benefit from their participation, and we liberate, or at least potentially liberate government from that discussion, we might get somewhere. What do I mean by that? If you think about what you said regarding how people are trained these days, there are universities in the US now that focus on training students for specific jobs. There are lots of multinational companies that have their own universities. In other words, they're not waiting for us to train marketing managers. They want to train their marketing managers in what they're doing. And in fact, for a while there was a big concern that might drive traffic away from the traditional institution into these corporate universities. It's a meeting of the minds that really needs to happen. Of course, you have to get big business to get to where they believe they can invest. And what can they reap out of it? Getting the university administrators to participate, and of course, getting faculty to participate. The only people that really don't have a say are the students themselves. But you also have to ask yourself, how many of those students who are going to get loans have the capacity to repay such? Okay, quite a few will, but will all of them? So what is the lifetime of the loan? So these are all questions that need to go into it. But I believe that, just like you have pointed out, It's something that needs to happen, but it should originate from the universities themselves. Let them come up with white papers that can help with such projects, so that even as you're going out there and you're soliciting funding, most of our banks in Nigeria, unless I'm missing something, I haven't heard of banks that really focus on education necessarily. But one has to agree that they have to see value, just like the last speaker is pointing out. And that value has to come from seeing that the value of education goes back to what it used to be. And I say that with a lot of concern, because we talk about the learning situation that Dr. Moti has described. If a student is coming to a class that should take 120 students, but the class capacity is 60, and they're sitting on the window frame, whether they learn or not now becomes an issue that we can't really be able to quantify. So being able to get the value displayed is the role of the university. Soliciting funding will come after we're able to say, yes, the degree has value. And once we do that, I mean, private universities are already doing their own. They're getting grants, they're getting funding from elsewhere. And there are business people who are looking for where to spend their money. Can we go and approach them and ask them to bring a little bit of what they have to invest in universities? But I think this requires stakeholder analysis. Who are the parties involved and how will they participate? But I think student loans will have to consider capacity to pay back. Because we're talking about the democratization of education. There are some students who, if you shake them from now to their kingdom come, they will only be able to pay if they get a job after going to school. And that's the next bugaboo. Will the degree guarantee that you will get a job in Nigeria? We don't know that. We cannot answer affirmatively in that regard. So until we get to that place where a transition from the university means that you're going to get a job, talking about a student loan, when you come out and you can't pay, at least I know for sure in the US, you can't pay your loan, something gives, your bill goes into collection. We don't even have a credit system that is very strong just yet. But it's a very wonderful idea, which may not speak exactly to that democratization that we're talking about, because our students are ready for grants. And that's something that our society can handle right now. But percentage-wise, I don't think we're where we can talk about paying back loans until we have a proper funnel of school to work. You graduate, you get a job, then you can pay back the loan. If you're not gonna get a job and you're going to become a kidnapper, that's not a profession. That does not put money in the pockets of the bank. And that's why I have a little bit of a concern. And I don't know how Professor Motu will react, but that's my concern right now, is not having that track of school to work, which can drive such. Thank you.
Okay, let me just briefly react to that. Yeah, the value of education, if we look at our own background, education is supposed to produce people that are self-reliant, people that should be useful to society, that help to encourage and promote national unity, bring about intellectual capacity development. Those are some of the issues we are talking about. And the funding pattern in Nigeria up till now has been mostly funding by government, because government have been the owners of the universities. But just like I said before, government has just suddenly proliferated universities to the extent that the little they put in is not enough. Yes, in Nigeria, we must also accept that to some extent, the government has subsidized education at the tertiary level, because what the university students pay now, definitely, if they were asked to pay commensurate to some of the facilities they have to be provided, it wouldn't be difficult. But I think that we are suddenly withdrawing, even state governments and federal governments. In the past, I remember I went to University of Port Harcourt. Benue State government gave me a scholarship, and that scholarship covered my tuition, my boarding, and my upkeep. In University of Lagos, where I did my master's, I got a scholarship too, and it covered all this. Today, state government gives students 10,000 naira. Some students cannot even use 10,000 naira as transport fare to get to their own institutions. So what do they do? So that aspect of funding is non-existent. Some even say they offer the 10,000 or 15,000, they don't pay. Students are still crying in many states that you offer scholarship, and when they say scholarship, it's all these little stipend I'm talking about, 10 to 15,000, they are calling scholarship today. And students can't even access it, they are not giving. They don't have it for years, and they're crying about it. I think what we need to do is to come together. If we even want to get grants to help us, except you provide the infrastructure. There are many granting institutions, when they see what is on the ground, they are not comfortable to give you any grant because you are not going to put them into research and bring out good students that will be self-reliant and so on and so forth. They think you don't even have what it takes to get that grant. And it's a problem for the Nigerian universities. The only thing that has worked so far, and I say the 7th grade, was an initiative of ASU that told government, charge especially companies and oil producing companies 2%, tax them. That is what has been taxed, and today we have a tertiary education funding. And that is what has been the 7th grade. If not, things would have been worse. But I think as we go forward, government will need to lay some certain foundation. And the universities are going out, yes, they are trying to lay foundation, bring all that, but it's not working very well because the initial push to provide the infrastructure, make the environment good so that you can attract people to also put into your own universities is not there. So the banks don't even go there. They are not putting anything there at all. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I would also just like to add that I think in Nigeria especially, the value of education has been placed in the certificate that people acquire rather than the knowledge. I think if they begin to push for more skill acquisition, that could go a long way. For example, in the UK, there are jobs that you could get without necessarily having a degree. Jobs like if you are trained in project management, in business analysis, in statistical programming, these do not require degree level qualifications for you to get such jobs. So if we begin to push for skill acquisition more in Nigeria, whereby it's not just the certificate, they want to see that you have a degree, 2221 before you get a job, I think it will help us move away from that value that we place on education with respect to certificate. That's just what I wanted to comment on. I have, I think it's Nashakia, NITT. Yes, please. Your hand is up. You'll have to unmute yourself to speak.
All right.
Yes.
Yes, thank you very much, Dr. Shadrach Iornem. I think we are flowing and we have learned a lot. If you look at the participation, NITT is the only institution. Others are individuals. We really had wanted some universities to be part of this program, but eventually I think perhaps they needed letters specifically to them to be able to receive and act upon them. If not, unless maybe somebody from the university saw some of our postings and decided to key in. NITT was particularly interested in this program when I saw our chief executive. And I'm most interested in the area of one of the recommendations of Professor Oba, where she talks about creating crisis teams, particularly how I wish more light is shed on this, because I know so many people have challenges in identifying teams or teamwork. And And even in the transport sector where we are working, you will just be surprised that it is in 2010, for instance, that the Manila Convention adopted teamwork for whatever we are doing in the transport sector. I think we need a little more voice in this area. Then I want to go back to Professor Moti. When I saw the slide that showed Professor Iornem, whom we are honoring today, in between some ICPC personnel, it was just a tip of the iceberg of the kind of incarceration he probably went through and the kind of humiliation. Don't we think, because in those days when I was directly working closely with Professor Iornem, one of the papers we wrote and a writer that he created was to recall J.F. Kennedy's regret in 1963 over the Bay of Pigs. And a president asked, how could I have been so stupid? Isn't it high time leadership, having realized now that the structures Prof was clamoring for, that we should break down the walls of the universities. We should make learning seamless. Now that they have realized it, don't we think the real starting point is to apologize to this personality, this prophet of democratic learning, as I have come to also learn of it today. I think the starting point should be an apology. Let Nigerians accept the fact that they were wrong. And that can be a good starting point. Then we have called for honoring a prophet at home. If the United States has taken time to honor this personality, I don't know, what's the criteria they use for all this CON, MFR, GCON? I don't understand. I feel Prof deserves an apology by Nigerians. And that can be a good starting point by saying that, look, we were wrong. And look, we have to start and be more committed to the fact that what he was saying, and in fact, if he's serving UNESCO, how do we bring him into the system at 71? I'm worried. Although last year, when we were presenting a certificate of registration of David Iornem Leadership Foundation, he said something spectacular. And we're already seeing it at work. He said, look, I have planned and I have begged God to give me 10 more years. And if he gives me 10 more years, I am going to do 10 times more than what I have done in 70 years. So I think he still has a lot of energy to help redirect the course of this nation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nashakia. Let me just take 2 minutes to respond to that. I think one of the issues to perhaps get to an apology is what we're already doing. For us to have this type of workshop or seminar to look at what is happening now and reflect on what he has been trying to make Nigeria realize that we need to democratize education, and it has been happening. I give you an example. I have a very good friend who earned a PhD online, and a university that he was teaching with decided to terminate his appointment and say they would not promote him because the degree was online. It took a lot of fight between me and him and some other officers. And who were doing this is the regulatory organ of the Nigerian University, the NUC. Because we have people there, some of them do not understand what we are talking about here. And so it took a lot of time before they were able to say that. And this was a highly rated university in South Africa, higher on the ranking than any Nigerian university. It was after that that he was able to get appointment with another university, not the one he was with. I don't want to mention name. So you can see we have problems like this, even in our country. So one of the issues is to continue to highlight the work he has done, just as we are doing in this seminar. And then, now that COVID-19 has come, and all our boasting that we are ready for anything online, we have the facilities and so on and so forth, and we have been caught hands down, knowing that we don't have. I think it is a way for now, ASU and every union and even the students and parents to now come together and say, look, government, you must improve this infrastructure. If not, we will not go forward. And that is when he will now come in. The other politics about whether he will be honored or not, we can discuss that and do some of the things offline. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much.
Okay, should I respond?
Yes, please.
Okay, so I align with the comments by Professor Moti that a prophet is never acceptable in his home country. And the time will come when the honors that are being sought will come from the quarters they are being sought from. But, you know, most of the time when you're doing something and you're passionate about it, you're dogged about it, only you know what you're doing. And he knew what he was doing. So I believe history will judge him very well. And sometimes you cannot carry value to someone who doesn't have the value. So something tells me that by the time this seminar has run a few years, somebody out there is going to know that what his life work was is what we are now turning our attention to in this last moment. I do want to comment for a minute about the crisis team scenario, to also tell you that it wasn't always there for the US themselves. In fact, we always talk about how management teams became the thing in the US after learning from the Japanese and their practice of keiretsu, that they never made a decision individually. They usually would work in a team in order to reach that decision. And so by the 90s, when this particular custom had become global, we started teaching, even in universities, teamwork. And you have to remember, it was going against the grain because we were talking about an American system that is individualistic culturally. And here you are about to teach them something that was anti-culture. So we, of course, I can tell you that in 29 years, I had issues with students who would come to office hours and swear that the worst thing that I can do to them is to put them in a team to work with their fellow classmates. But the value that was seen in creating teams did not always belong to the US management culture or even the culture in universities. So even when crisis communication started to present what is done elsewhere, and the understanding that having a team that actually is able to congregate, not because a crisis emerged, but before a crisis hits, became something that was now the norm, because people knew that there were certain environments that were already crisis environments. And the one pointed out by Mr. Nashikaya is one of them, transportation. If you talk about airlines, you know that for sure, if you're in the airline business, you can anticipate that a potential crisis could be a plane crash. You're in a hospital, you're going to have code blue be an issue. So crisis, obviously there are some areas of business that are crisis prone. And crisis was never really something that was associated with university environments prior to that ballooning of campus shootings. And everybody started saying, oh my goodness, you know, we have to prepare. We have to know what to do if such a thing happens. And so the whole idea of having a crisis team is assigning roles, anticipating the crisis before it happens, not waiting for the crisis to hit and then starting to form a team. So once you have a team, then you have to decide what roles individuals will play in the team. Because depending on your area or the industry that you're in, your crisis team is going to be significantly different from another area. And so some of the common team positions obviously would be having a spokesperson and someone who is the leader of the team. So those are pretty common, but depending on what area of business, then you can start to decide who is doing what. For instance, on campus, you can't have a crisis team without having someone who knows CPR, first aid, all those kinds of things in case there's a fire, in case there's some kind of a natural disaster. But depending on where the crisis hits, you can then figure out what the makeup of the crisis team will be. So I think for Nigerian universities is obviously sitting together and trying to figure out what are the core competencies that the folks that you're going to have should have. If it's an education sector, obviously, and we're talking about such issues now that we're discussing here, you must have someone who has negotiating skills. You must have someone who would speak for the team. You must have someone who understands the laws of the land and can obviously bring them to the table as discussions move on, and so on and so forth. So crisis teams are things that I'm happy to sell to anybody who wants to buy it. And you know, it's not just having a crisis team outside, even in places where you have natural disasters. You know, now is hurricane season in some parts of the US. Back in California, the thing is earthquakes. People are even advised in their own homes, you need to form your own crisis team. Who's going to store the food in case you guys don't get to see the light of day for a few days? So those are some of the kinds of things that Nigerian universities ought to be thinking about, given the suddenness of COVID and how it took the world by surprise. And I think we can do it knowing fully well what are the areas that we need to address. So I hope I've answered your question, unless you have additional questions. I'll be happy to talk to you about transportation offline if you like.
Thank you very much, Professor Stevina. I would like us to take maybe one or two more questions, and then we can bring the session to a close. So if there is any question from anyone, if you have any question and you don't know how to go about using Zoom to raise your hand, then you can unmute yourself and just speak. Okay, I want to assume there are no questions. So thank you very much. In fact, for me, what I want us to take from this whole experience is more like the saying that when life gives you lemons, you make lemonade. As an organization, we used to hold our seminars physically, where we gather in numbers 40, 50, 100. And this COVID-19 pandemic hit us hard. And if we had wanted to wait until everything resolves, then we'll just be there waiting. Initially, we thought, okay, let's wait for a while and see, and then reschedule the program from March to July. We waited and nothing seemed to be happening. It was even getting worse. And so we made use of technology available at our disposal, Zoom, and we've been able to continue our programs virtually. And I think this is what we are trying to say. Something has happened. We shouldn't just sit down and wait until there's a solution to that problem. We have technologies at our disposal. Zoom can take up to 100 people. I don't know if you upgrade, it can take up to 1,000. There's also Google Meet. And if you can see NITT, the facility they have there, it's something that even with Zoom, you can be talking to up to as many people in the hall there. And so these technologies, these devices, these systems are really affordable, so to speak. And of course, there will be issues with internet connection like we've been experiencing, but even with research, you could find out which of the technology or which of the provider gives you a better connectivity, or which package will you get to enable you speak for hours without interruption. So this is just what we are saying, trying to make good use of the situation, try to make use of what you have at your disposal and not just waiting and thinking, well, this one is beyond us, and there are many other organizations also closed down, so why shouldn't we close down So it's taking advantage and always trying to be ahead, seeing what others are doing and copying things that are working and then following suit. So I just want to thank you very much. I have a few comments here which I'll just read out. So for example, we have from Richard. He says, I think the problem of funding and value of education will only be solved when we are able to change our current political and socio-economic cultures. The current political culture does not allow for the development of Nigeria in all ramifications. We need a new vision and culture to get everything in Nigeria, to get it working again. Therefore, the problems of funding and value of education is only a reflection of the complete rot in our country. We also have a comment here from Wakwe. Says, I couldn't agree more with you, Richard. Pensioners and faculty of the College of Education have taken into the streets to protest the non-payment of 11-month pension salaries. It is an onerous task to insensitivize an individual to teach with zest and a sense of obligation when he or she can't feed their family. Chinua Achebe aptly underscored that the only trouble with Nigeria is the failure of leadership. So Moses Yao is saying, thank you very much for the excellent presentations. Gabriel wants access to soft copies of the presentation. Yes, I'll make them available. The session is also recorded, and so I'll be sharing the links. So on this occasion, I would like to thank my guest speakers, Professor Moti and Professor Evolocha, and also thank our special guest of honor, Professor David Iornem, and all the participants, distinguished ladies and gentlemen that have taken out time out of their busy schedule to join this leadership seminar. We want to appreciate you and we say thank you. I don't know what David is planning in terms of celebration, but again, we have his grandchildren. They've made a recording and I would like to play their happy birthday songs. So what do you want to say to Grandpa?
God bless you.
Good. Samantha, what do you want to say to Grandpa?
God bless you, Grandpa.
Say hip, hip, hip.
Hooray!
Good.
To you, happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, happy birthday, happy birthday to you. May the good Lord bless you. May the good Lord bless you. May the good Lord bless Grandpa. May the good Lord bless you. Hip, hip, hip. Hip, hip, hip. Good. What will you tell Grandpa?
Happy birthday to you. birthday, Grandpa. Hope you are doing fine. May the good Lord be with you. In the mighty name of Jesus. Amen. Love you. Happy birthday, Grandpa. We wish you long life and good health. Thank you for being the most amazing grandpa in the whole world. We love you. Birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, happy birthday, happy birthday to you. How old are you now? How old are you now? How old are you now? How old are you now?
Hip, hip, hip.
Hooray!
Hip, hip, hip.
Hooray!
Hip, hip, hip.
Hooray!
Okay, so what are your wishes for Grandpa? Church, let's start with you.
I wish you love me.
Okay. What's your own wishes for Grandpa?
I wish you could be rich.
Sorry, I didn't hear you well.
I wish you could be rich.
Oni, what are your wishes for Grandpa?
I want you to come back.
Okay. Grandpa, Oni says he wants you to come back here. Happy birthday, Grandpa. We love you.
So thank you very much. So those were the messages from Prof's grandchildren. Happy birthday, Grandpa. Yes, so I want to thank you all for joining. Thank you, Professor Stevena. We contacted you at such a short notice, and you still accepted to present. Likewise, Professor Moti, I want to thank you. Perhaps if you have one final word, each of you, which you want to say to the participants before we leave, that would be great. Just a word based on today's presentation. Yes.
Well, I think it's been a good time coming together virtually to celebrate your name and also to brainstorm concerning what we need to learn to get going forward. And I don't think it should stop here. And for Nashakia, the man in charge of the leadership at Iornem Leadership Foundation, I just want to hint this to you. Perhaps part of the things we should start doing, maybe next year, the in-person meetings may be better. We could look at David Iornem and e-learning in Nigeria and the globe. And this is part of now trying to let people know what he has done so that we can key into it. We can start learning on that. Prof, thank you very much and happy birthday. I will call you later to wish you personally. Thank you very much, my colleague, Prof. Uba, for being with us. And all those that are online spend their money to join us. God bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. This has been an honor for me to, I didn't know it was Prof's birthday. Mine was just a few days ago. I would have invited him over here for some vodka. But it's okay, we can drink virtually offline. But please, to my colleague, Professor Moti, thanks for a very invigorating presentation. And of course, just like you point out, I think some of these discussions should be ongoing, not one-time events. I do want to encourage everyone who signed in to think about Nigeria as a work in progress, and we all have a responsibility to that work in progress. I always remind myself that while it's okay for me to criticize Nigeria at every turn, I ban other people who are not Nigerians from engaging in that. And for as long as we have that nationalistic spirit, Nigeria can only be ours to fix. I want to encourage everyone to remember that if we take it as a personal project, that we can indeed succeed. Thank you, everybody. And happy birthday, Prof, again. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I think we can call it a day. Thank you for the messages, Prof. We got more messages here wishing you happy birthday. So thank you and have a wonderful day. And we bring the session to a close. Thank you.